Rabbi, you can rest when it's in there for prayer. Okay. If somebody wants to come with me, whoever it's going to carry, I can give you. I think so. Yes, not only just not. Sorry, they did a private moment with you all. It has to do with the structure of today, the holiday that our social holidays. But I want to just greet everyone. I only got to meet prior to that. Rabbi King, it's my honor to officiate it. It's and we looking forward to hearing words of law and adoration. I'm not too wonderful when I say that we can talk about everything. Harriet was a member of this congregation for 50 years. I know the last ones for those dates. One of They asked me to start late because they said there was a mistake in the print. You know, in our news, it said the funeral was our So they told me to put on the sign it off and say it was here, but I want to ask them what they do. Basically.
I
That sounds perfect. That's great. I'm just checking in everything here we need.
I got three.
Oh, no, you're right. I was set mine.
We're over.
So do you want to speak in the beginning? Or?
Do you want me to make the announcement? Or do you- Okay, it's right there.
You got it.
I mean,
I'll do it. You got?
you know, what we usually do, obviously, we just tell them where the family is going to gather and name the contributions and
We'll do it. Sounds good. Actually, okay, and then I'll start with the liturgy. So then I'll start.
when do you want to say the prayer for Korea?
I'm going to do it after you.
Oh, after,
I'm going to do it as the beginning of the service.
okay. I already. Heard on it. Plus, I'll make it again. Yeah, well, yeah.
Is it a different spot to access? Did you see?
Well, I didn't have. I just know.
Were there any seating set up? Was there no seating set up? I'm trying to get the. Because like actually reverse the actually they just I'm skeptical just because I've never seen this until I got dark by the press my whole life.
I've
Been here.
seen it.
No.
Been here 16 years. That's right. Yeah, this is enough. Yeah, well.
Fair enough.
And then you might have an argument. Tell me when.
Okay, I think.
Tell me when.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a good time to silence cell phones.
Ladies and gentlemen, the family of Harriet Selin will be gathering immediately following the service at the cemetery, the interment service at the cemetery at the residence 2830 South Main Street, apartment 422, and that's in Ann Arbor. Those of you wishing to further honor the memory of Mrs. Selin may best do so by means of a contribution to Planned Parenthood, the Nature Conservatory, or University of Michigan School of Public Health, the Marvin and Harriet Selin Scholarship Fund. This information is available on our website, irakaufman.com.
I feel like things suddenly got too serious. Just moments ago, there was laughing and just people greeting each other and smiles all around the congregation. And I just want to ask you to channel some of those feelings right now. I know the family asked me when I first met with them about today, they said, we'd love more of a celebration of life than something too sad. So I'm going to ask you, if you had a smile on your face 60 seconds ago, try to channel that through this ceremony. I know there's a serious component too, and we can hold both in our hearts. We can have both the feeling of dancing and wailing. Our deepest condolences on the passing of Harriet Selin. Our condolences to her daughters, Cindy and Roberta and Janet, to her sons-in-law, Lou and Rick, to her sister-in-law, Rebecca, to her beloved grandchildren, Matthew, Elena, Sarah, Daniel, Laurel, Mark, and Kelsey, to their partners, Nat and Margaret, and to great-grandchildren, Helen and Will and Benjamin, and condolences on behalf of all of us who are friends and otherwise to her 20 nieces and nephews. We also, in addition to condolences, we express our blessings of welcome for those welcoming her in the next world. Marvin, Bob, Ted Chudikoff, and her grandson, Gregory Schaefer. Lako zeman, leit lo chefetz tachat hashamayim, eit la ledet ve'eit la mut, eit la tat ve'eit la kornatua, eit la harog ve'eit lirpo, eit lithrot ve'eit livnot, eit livkot ve'eit liskok, eit sefod ve'eit rekod. These are the words of Kohelet of Ecclesiastes. There's a time for every experience under heaven. There's a time for being born. And there comes a time for dying. There's a time for planting, a time for uprooting, a time for slaying, and a time for healing, a time for tearing down, and a time for building up, time for weeping, and a time for laughter, time for wailing, time for dancing, time for throwing stones, and a time for gathering them up and putting them on the grave, a time for embracing, a time for distance, a time for seeking, a time for losing, a time for keeping, and a time for discarding and redistributing. And there's a time for ripping and a time for sewing and a time for silence and a time for speaking. In Jewish tradition, today is a time as hard as it can be, a time of ripping and a time for speaking. We begin the ceremony with mourners ripping a ribbon, which is part of their clothing. And in the Talmud, they say that the sound of that tear is the sound of a little bit of one's heart being torn. And that sound goes directly to heaven, along with the shofar blast and the cries of the poor. I'm going to ask those who are wearing a ribbon at this time to please rise and repeat after me, and then we'll rip our ribbon. Baruch atah Adonai. Baruch atah Adonai. Eloheinu melech haolam. Eloheinu melech haolam. Dayan ha'emet. Dayan ha'emet means blessed be God who is the true judge. And will you tear a little bit further up the ribbon now that it's been started? We may be seated. It can be hard to speak at a time like this, but our tradition asks us to do so, for this is a time of speaking. And so I'm going to ask our speakers to come forward in order at this time. We're going to start with Janet, and then Kathy, and then grandchildren, Sarah, Mark, and Kelsey. And then I'll close with some prayers. We also know that many people, in addition to this full sanctuary, are also streaming. And so we invite them into this presence.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Janet, Harriet's youngest daughter. I'm speaking for myself and my two sisters, Roberta and Cindy. When I think of our mom, I think of wisdom, grace, and dignity with a lot of Energizer Bunny thrown in. Mom and her brother Ted grew up in Munising in the Upper Peninsula, and that's where her love for the outdoors began. She enjoyed family picnics at the lakes and summer camp where she learned to swim and canoe. In the winters, she skated and skied. She was tough. There were no ski lifts, and she walked up the hills. She attended the University of Michigan, and that's where she met our dad. As young adults, Mom and Dad shared an adventurous spirit. Their honeymoon was a cross-country train ride to Banff to hike in the Canadian Rockies. And a few years later, they took the train to Aspen with friends for their first mountain skiing experience. Like, who did that back then? Mom was a great athlete, although she really never saw herself that way. She played golf, tennis, and squash. She swam, she biked, she backpacked, she skied. All of these she did with our dad, and often with her longtime friend, Tina. Mom was a gifted communicator. She was a great listener with thoughtful responses. As a child, I would sit on top of the refrigerator while she made dinner, and I would tell her all the minutia of my day. Since most of you have probably never sat on top of a refrigerator, I can tell you that it's really warm up there and you're completely out of the way, except for, of course, the occasional opening of the freezer. Our mom made everybody feel special. I think everyone here felt she was interested in you, in your life, and your family. You weren't wrong. She truly was. My husband always said that our mom was like E.F. Hutton. When Harriet talks, everyone stops to listen. In her quiet way, she commanded respect and she controlled the room. Family was her utmost priority. We were surrounded by family and she loved it. We were so lucky to have Uncle Ted, Aunt Rebecca, Claudia, and Matt, and many of my dad's side of the family living close by. Many of our older cousins attended the University of Michigan, and Mom hosted frequent dinners with really lively political conversations for the time, and a standard menu of standing rib roast, scramble, toffee bars, chocolate chip cookies, and ice cream with chocolate sauce. Clearly, those were the good old days when that's what we all considered health food. I can't talk about our mom without talking about our dad. Our mom and dad were best friends. It was a house filled with endless chatter, laughter, tons of support and love. When we were growing up, our parents were always having fun. Their laughter filled the house, and there were frequent card games, ski trips, ping pong and tennis games, walks to ice cream, dinner parties with family and friends, and summer cottages in unison with hikes by Lake Superior. After our dad died, our mom found a way to continue to truly enjoy life and was always excited about the next possible adventure. She loved to travel and visited all 7 continents, including Antarctica. Years later, our parents' longtime friend, Bob Baber, became a special friend and companion to our mom. Bob really brightened up her life. Near the end of our mom's life, Roberta moved to Ann Arbor. Roberta immediately became involved in her own Ann Arbor life, but spent a lot of time with our mom. It was a gift to both of them. They spent a lot of time together and really deepened their already close relationship. Roberta added so much joy and security to our mom's life. It was a beautiful thing to watch, and Cindy and I will be forever grateful to Roberta. The next speaker today is our first cousin, Kathy, who we all call the 4th sister. Kathy was more than a niece to our mom. She was her best friend. Kathy and Patrick were always there for her. They included her in their lives everywhere, from movies to lectures, and always Kathy and Patrick's Sunday night dinners. My sisters and I would like to thank all of you who are attending the services, either in person or virtually. You are all very important in our mom's life. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Kathy. I'm Harriet's niece. Older cousins, is that necessary? It's nice to see you all here. You're here because you knew my Aunt Harriet, and to know my Aunt Harriet was to love her. I know that a lot of cousins are on Zoom right now listening because they loved Aunt Harriet. You know, when we'd all get together, you know, when we'd like be one-on-one or a couple people, everybody was like, why can't we live with Marvin and Harriet? They have so much fun. Why can't we be there? And, you know, it was the most welcoming family. I mean, I didn't know this until recently, even though we lived a block away from them. We were all in Iron River, Michigan for a while, and we lived a block away. And apparently my dad would just drop off the 3 of us with Harriet, who had 3 small kids, and would just say, oh, you don't mind, do you? You know, you've got kids you're looking after. And, you know, I would imagine she minded a bit, but they were good friends. My dad and Harriet were good friends till the day he died. She was always the girl. I'd say, oh, she's such a good girl. He just loved her, but it was always girl. I mean, I heard it those last few months. You know, I didn't write down my what I was going to say because I knew Janet and Cindy would be the other kids, everybody would be telling you about their life. But I just want to tell you a little bit about what she was like as an aunt and as just a person, what my experience of her was. And I have a feeling that your experience will probably be much the same. You know, you always were welcomed with Aunt Harriet. You always were welcomed. And I was lying in bed the other night and I was thinking about her and I was thinking, my God, I never, ever once wondered what kind of mood is she in? Boy, I hope she's in a good mood. You know, Harriet went through a lot of loss, especially these last years of her life. And you never walked in and thought maybe, you know, she'd be in some horrible mood. She always, always, always had room for you. You know, she always considered how you felt. She always welcomed you. She always welcomed you. She was very social. Harriet absolutely adored you. She absolutely loved you. I mean, she didn't just, you know, seem to like and be interested in everybody. She was. You know, I remember I was talking to my sister the other day and she said words that the way I hadn't quite put it. My sister Lisa said, Harriet saw you and she knew you. And it was true. She really did. She knew you. She accepted you. You know, I'm not saying Harriet, you know, agreed with or loved everything about all of us or everything we did, but there was a deep acceptance. You never felt judged. And it wasn't like, oh, these are the cousins. Oh, these are the grandchildren. Oh, these are, you knew, she knew you and wanted to know you more as an individual. It was really kind of a remarkable thing. So my parents were older than Harriet. Harriet was the young one, the baby. And when I got married at the tender age of 53, when I got married, my mother had been very ill and was way too ill to come to the wedding. And so was my father. Harriet got on a plane by herself and came to New York. I don't know where she stayed. I don't know where she ate, you know, breakfast. I don't know what she did. She asked nothing, demanded nothing. And she was there at my wedding. She was there because she knew my parents weren't. She adored my husband. She adored Patrick right from the beginning. Right from the beginning, they just took to each other immediately. Although I will say one thing I didn't know about Harriet, and I'm not sure if you guys did. I don't know if the cousins did. It wasn't just Patrick. Harriet liked men. It was pretty cute. You spend enough time around her and you'd pick up on that. It's quite adorable. The other thing you might know about Harriet, I mean, you know, Janet's talking about the grace and the dignity. Well, I can tell you a little bit about some not so graceful, dignified behavior. So I had a dear friend, Gail, and, you know, Tina, Rebecca, lovely Rebecca, you know, Bob, Harriet, Gail, we'd all get together a lot. But Patrick and I and Gail and Harriet would go to movies together a lot. We would go to movies together. And it wasn't long after they're getting to know each other. They would sit together in the movies and they would talk and giggle like preteen girls through the whole thing, through the entire thing. So we moved here 9 years ago. And I had been here for 1.5 years when Marvin was very ill at the end. And so Harriet and I had started getting close then. And we moved here and, you know, I watched Harriet. What a role model. You know, I watched Harriet lose Marvin. And I know you all did too. And Bob and Tina and other friends, you know, and her grandson, Greg. And I think that it came across me a comparison that I think at first, those of you who know them both might think, what? But, you know, Harriet reminded me of my dad in some ways. My dad always said, and it wasn't in a bad way, it was in a good way. He said, you know, you play the cards you're dealt. And after my mom died, and all his brothers and sisters died, and all his friends died, he stayed engaged in life. And I watched Harriet do that too. She didn't shut down. She didn't get close. She was still interested. We had some new friends that came from LA. They were Eastern European, a psychiatrist and his family. And, you know, we had her over for dinner with them. And they have a 14-year-old daughter, and she was interested in all of them. You know, she stayed interested and truly interested, and she wanted to know, and she'd ask me how they're doing and how the daughter was doing. She stayed engaged. She had a wonderful, wonderful life. She had a wonderful life. And the thing she loved most about that life and made her life so wonderful was you. Thank you so much for being part of her life.
We invite Sarah.
Can you all hear me? All right, I'll try to speak up. You can remind me if I forget. I'm Sarah. I'm one of the grandchildren. I've been really missing my grandma this week, and I've spent a lot of time running through memories of all of us together and wishing I could tell her how much all of those experiences have meant to me. It's hard to put into words, so I might sound a little cheesy here and probably a little bit biased. I'm sure a lot of people like their grandma, and a lot of people think their grandmother is special, but ours really was. One of my earliest memories is of racing through the garage in my house, ecstatic that my grandma and grandpa had just arrived. And then sitting on the upstairs couch next to grandma, who I adored, stunned to learn that she had something like 7 pairs of reading glasses and still couldn't manage to find a pair when she needed one. I thought it was hilarious to tease her about this when I was little. Growing up, we had many holidays and summer vacations in Ann Arbor at Grandma and Grandpa's house, and I loved going there. There were a lot of things that would appeal to a kid. For starters, Grandma had a whole kitchen drawer full of spearmint gum, and you were allowed to have as much as you wanted. Her fridge was always stocked with the best homemade raspberry jam, and in their garage was a freezer full of peanut blossoms, toffee bars, and chocolate chip cookies. To this day, no holiday is complete without those cookies. You have to have some of every kind, preferably along with some ice cream and Grandma's hot fudge. There was a basement with toys and a ping pong table for the kids to play and the adults, and a seemingly never-ending network of close family and friends. In the summers, we'd go to Chippewa and Huron Valley, where I first learned to swim and jump on the diving board and jump on the most amazing in-ground trampolines. And we always seemed to bump into at least one person they knew. Grandma usually gave you a trinket from the latest place she'd visited, and their house was filled with pictures and mementos from trips all over the world. Their life, their world was full and fun. When I was older, I was one of many kids who was lucky enough to get extra time with Grandma when I was at school at Michigan. Grandma's house became a bit of a home away from home, and my grandma, a bit of an anchor when I was stressed about school or life in general. She'd come meet me on State Street and take me out to eat at Red Hawk or have me over for a home-cooked meal. And to be honest, the first year I think I used to lug my laundry bin with me over to her house. I was already in my early 20s and there was a laundry room at the Lockwog. But why not? It never occurred to me to feel silly about this because I was practically at home. I'd go down into the basement and throw in a load of laundry and stop and look at the wall of black and white family pictures for the 1000th time. And then I'd go upstairs and we'd eat and chat, and she'd send me home with fresh laundry and probably cookies. She didn't just make time for us, though. She took time to get to know our friends. One night, she took my roommates and me out to dinner, and as soon as it was over, my friends volunteered what I already knew. My grandma was really cool. She still traveled internationally, played sports, kept a full social calendar, and was totally engaged with the world and the issues of the day. She showed us by example that with a little luck and good health, there is no set age at which you need to stop moving, learning, and forming new friendships. My Uncle Rick has written a series of children's books called My Grandma Could Do Anything. And I just always assumed those books were really about our grandma. I mean, no one said this explicitly, but come on. She hiked, she skied, she played tennis and golf and bridge. She kept up with all of us grandchildren, not just by phone, but by email, sometimes even by text. And until very recently, it was no big deal for her to hop on a plane and fly all over the country to see each of us. She seemed to do everything well, and she kept doing so much of it for so long that it felt like it was never going to stop. I couldn't begin to sum up the experiences of the other grandchildren because they weren't cookie cutter. She took an interest in each of us and developed independent relationships with us that fit our personalities. What I do know is that we were all very lucky to have our grandmother in our lives for so long. Our grandma was truly awesome. Our grandma could do anything. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. A little louder. My name is Mark Diltz. I'm Harriet's grandson. Grandma Harriet is someone I always admired. I admired her for many reasons, but most of all because of the way she made other people feel. Grandma had a way of connecting with others, which is truly a gift. I also admired the way Grandma lived her life, with a sense of adventure, lively humor, and childlike curiosity. It amazed me the international trips she would take. And I remember playing tennis with her at the spry young age of 91. Yes, that actually happened. Grandma Harriet was a shining example of someone living an adventurous and fulfilling life, even as she aged most gracefully. The passing of time can be challenging. As time passes, you find moments along the way that remind you that nothing in life lasts forever. Our experiences on this earth are constantly changing, which can make life difficult at times, but also beautiful. This is one of those moments for me to realize that Ann Arbor will never be the same for our family. That I'll never again arrive at 558 Heritage Road to Grandma's warm smile, a bustling house full of family, friends, loads of laughter, and best of all, Grandma's famous chocolate chip cookies. That is very difficult and sad, but beautiful to recognize and appreciate how lucky all of us are to have had a relationship with such a special person. When I was in 5th grade, Grandma Harriet wrote me a letter for a school project describing her childhood. She talked about growing up in the Great Depression, going to summer camp by the lake, horseback riding, skiing with makeshift skis before ski lifts, which as an 11-year-old blew my mind, and honestly still kind of blows my mind. She really liked to ski, obviously. The letter also described family parties at her house, joking around with her siblings, and accidentally lighting a friend's attic on fire. This at the time was also shocking that Grandma Harriet could do such a thing. She seemed absolutely perfect to all of us. I got in my fair share of trouble growing up, but at least I didn't light someone's house on fire. That's a lie. I did accidentally light my kitchen on fire in college, so I guess it runs in the family. I blame genetics for that. There were many, many more stories that were passed around throughout the years that gave a window into Grandma Harriet's life. Falling in love with Grandpa, starting a family, moving to Ann Arbor, taking countless ski trips and international adventures, playing a ton of bridge, and of course, being a loving and caring grandmother to her grandchildren. What a beautiful life to celebrate. When I think of Grandma Harriet, I'll always remember feelings of joy, care, and safety. The world lost a great woman, and I'm so sad she's no longer with us. But I'm so grateful to have had such a special relationship with my grandmother. She provided me memories I'll forever cherish. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Can you all hear me all right? My name is Kelsey Diltz, and I am Grandma Harriet's youngest grandchild. 24 years ago, I looked up at my grandma and held her hand as we walked into my grandpa's funeral. I knew I was going to be okay because I had my grandma's warmth and love with me. As I walk in today, I wish I had my grandma's hand to hold as I enter the room. There are so many lovely and beautiful stories I remember with my grandma. From the time she would make me chocolate chip cookies without the chocolate chips, to looking through her vacation photo albums with her. Through all these memories, the thing I remember most is how my grandma made me feel. Grandma always made me feel loved and special just for being me. Whenever I would talk to her on the phone, she would tell me how I made her day and would always be excited to hear about my new adventures. Although I don't always have my grandma's hand to physically hold, she is always here for me. She has been there for every big milestone, holding my hand along the way. She was there at my first day of college, first job interview, and first day of grad school. Her love and support has always been with me. Whenever I think about my grandma, I feel a sense of calm and care for her. Her beautiful, sweet smile will stay with me. She will truly be missed, and I will forever love her. I will always keep you in my heart, Grandma Harriet. I forever love you.
Feel so sad that I didn't have these personal connections with Harriet, which have really deeply touched my heart. I'm jealous of all of you. And I'm going to ask your indulgence just to share a little bit from my perspective of her public persona and not the personal. I mean, after all, Harriet was a member just of Beth Israel congregation for 50 years. Think about the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, turned over generations and learned about everything about Judaism. And she had 10 years on them just in this congregation alone. As a rabbi, I have to ask why Harriet Selin passed from this world to the next on Erev Yom Kippur. This is a time when the gates to heaven, we are told, are wide open at their very widest. It is a time when here we're standing all the way back to the room, just hours after she died, dressed in white, our most intertwined moment of the year in community. We wear white in order to visually wear our inner dignity, our inner kavod on the outside. It is when we've made amends for our missing the mark during the year, we stand before the gates at our most blameless. It's a time when the book of life is wide open. And what a life Harriet lived. I know it's been mentioned, Harriet grew up in Munising, Michigan. Even today, it's less than 2,000 people. One of her earliest experiences was falling in love with playing bridge, which she learned from her parents. It became a lifelong love, as many of you know, and if you were on the other team, you might have been a lifelong victim. The bridge group Harriet's parents, Goldie and George, played in, met in the couple's homes, which meant when the group met in the homes of those in nearby Blaney, that the group would have to find substitutes for Goldie and George, as the sign into Blaney publicly announced no Jews allowed. So we know she attended the University of Michigan, married her beloved Marvin at the Michigan League on their graduation day in 1950. They had to move to Iron River, as Marv's father just having died. The family business needed him. But after 14 years, they moved to Ann Arbor, where they lived the rest of their lives, as you well know. They both became university administrators, with Marv rising from assistant to the dean to associate dean to simply dean of the School of Public Health. And all of this with him not having a doctorate, which is unheard of. Given Marv's stellar rise, we might easily neglect the equally stellar rise of Harriet. After focusing on being a mother and a wife for the children's young years, Harriet went to work at the Institute of Social Research, and then as the administrative manager of the dermatology department at U of M Hospital. Just imagine this. She rose to the position of managing 170 people under her. It can be hard to grasp the import of a woman of Harriet's generation doing this. Mark won against her. Women of her generation could graduate universities even summa cum laude, and were still expected to become administrative assistants or school teachers. And second, a woman coming into the workforce after raising children for a dozen years, even today, are viewed as incapable of understanding the present needs of the workplace. 170 people under her. At this synagogue, I co-lead a team of 5. I have no biases against me, and I feel on most days that I'm barely managing to be effective at all. Harriet was a big deal in her career. This leads me to understand how God chose Harriet's spirit to pass into the next world in Erev Yom Kippur, the time that, according to tradition, the gates of heaven are fully open. First, her competitive spirit. If there were a race to the gates of heaven, Harriet would have won, and I think she did. Whether playing bridge or playing tennis, watch out. I was heard at 92 playing tennis with her grandson. When the ball came lightly to her, she absolutely smashed the heck out of it. Harriet loved to win. But as the family told me when I asked them for a word to describe it, Harriet, maybe a better word than competitive is determined. Harriet had no meanness in her competitiveness. She had zest for life and determination. When she set her mind on a goal, she could not be thrown off. And on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we Jews apologize to God for missing the mark, which is the Hebrew translation of sometimes a word that's called sin. Harriet rarely missed the mark. She was determined to get it right. When she was determined to smash that bullseye, you could trust that she was succeeding.
Who is this?
Hence the front of the line.
What
for
is
Harriet.
this?
Funeral.
Second,
Oh.
on Yom Kippur, the Jewish people are the most intertwined spiritually than at any moment. We stand together, as I said, not individually before God, but as a group. And God sees us as we dressed in white, as our dignity on the outside, not as separate bodies and interests, but just in that pure human self. Harriet had this gift. She saw people's kavod, their God-given dignity. Her social network was like Beth Israel filled to the brim all the way to the back of the room on Kol Nidre. As the family told me, when you went with her to the Musical Society concerts, you couldn't get to your seats because of all the people stopping her to greet her and her greeting them. She was like a celebrity just trying to get to the back of the room. Everyone was connected to Harriet. As Bob Faber wrote about her in the famous article on Madam X, if those books, The Perfect Grandma, My Grandma Was Amazing, was about her, we all know Madam X was about her. She was the perfect person. From the tennis and bridge and concerts to her million friends, to her being generous. And he wrote to throw people off, and she was very active in her church. But we know what he really meant. It was her gift of seeing people's true dignity, their spark of God, their soul, and recognize it and interacting with that part of themselves that changed those around her. It is what makes it possible to manage 170 people effortlessly, at least seeming so. It's what made it impossible to make a short trip to the synagogue or to the farmer's market or to a restaurant or walking through the dining room at Balfour without being enfolded by the admiration and greetings of others. She would talk with everyone and connected with that best part of themselves. And it's what made her such a great humanitarian. She was committed to her social causes. When you see someone's inner dignity, their kavod, then you are committed to tikkun olam, because you have to honor them, you have to protect them, and you have to fight for them. Harriet did, and people adored her. And finally, this respect for the human dignity of others extended to the dignity that radiated from her. She had an elegance, a generosity of her spirit and of her time, a radiance of her dignified self. She knew who she was. She was not a tragic widow. She was part of the club of merry widows. She had a strong sense of self and what she wanted for herself, and she did not deviate. And when she spoke, from her many book clubs to a casual interaction, as Z.F. Hutton said, people listened. Everyone benefited from her presence. There's a Jewish saying that joy is a taste of the goodness of this world, but laughter is a taste of the world to come. I know that Marv made her laugh. May her laughter in this world be a taste of the laughter that she will have reunited with him in the next. May her memory bring many blessings. From Proverbs chapter 31, Eshet Chayil. A woman of valor who can find, she is more precious than rubies. Her husband places his trust in her and only gains thereby. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. The work of her hands is to be admired and done with love. She opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She has no fear of the snow for her household, for she has wrapped them in her warmth. She is robed in strength and dignity, and she smiles at the future. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and a lesson of kindness is on her tongue. She is the foundation of her home. Her children rise up and make her happy, and her husband praises her, and they all say, many women have excelled, but you excel them all. Beauty can be superficial, but a woman of inner dignity and holiness deserves the praise. We praise her for her efforts and her actions witness to her greatness at the gates. I ask you to please rise for the memorial prayer. First, the translation. God, full of compassion, the ever-flowing fount of compassion, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure shining souls. The soul of Esther, Chava Gedalia, Harriet, Selin, who is returning to her eternal home in you. God of mercy, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul continue to be bound up, the bonds of the souls in this world precious to her, and the bonds of the souls in the next world precious to her. And therein may she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
El male rachamim, shochen ba'amiromim, hamtze menucha nechona, tachat kanfei hashchina, v'ma'alot kedoshim utehorim, kezohar harakia mazhirim, V'nishmat Esther bat Chava v'Gedalia shehacha le'olama began Eden tehei menuchata Ana Baal harachamim hastireha b'seter kenafecha le'olamim utror bitzor hachayim et nishmata Adonai hu nachlata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar amen.
Excuse me. In just a moment, we'll call for pallbearers. Just a short announcement. Those of you joining the family at the cemetery for the interment service, we would ask that as the casket leaves the synagogue today, if you'll please go directly to your cars so we could get everybody to the cemetery in a timely manner. Thank you.
Pallbearers, please come forward at this time. Sorry. And as the casket proceeds, family first follows the casket, and then we friends follow the casket as well to our cars. And then for those going to the cemetery.